All right. Well, I'm going to call the Winnebago County Board meeting to order. Tonight is Thursday, January 28th, 2021. So first of all, tonight, we're going to have the invocation and pledge allegiance by board member Steve Schultz. Mr. Schultz.
Dear Lord, we're grateful for your holy presence with us. We're thankful that you empower us to do your work. You've given us physical health and well-being and the capacity to serve our constituents. And we trust you tonight. We know that you're with us, that you're for us. We know that you have sent your son Jesus so that we can have life and hope and purpose. I pray that you will be with our deliberations, with our conversations, that we will please you in what we say and what we do. And we're grateful for your presence. In Christ's name, amen.
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 Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America. And to the republic
For which it stands,
one nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty
liberty
and
and justice for all.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Schultz, for that invocation. I want to read the statement for the public. The Winnebago County Board Chairman has determined that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we'll move on to our agenda announcements. I don't believe there's any amendment to the agenda this evening. Is that correct, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, very good. So now I will call on Clerk Gummau to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mrs. Crosby,
Here.
Ms. Fellers,
Here.
Mr. Girl,
Present.
Mrs. Gorel,
Present.
Mr. Hoffman,
Present.
Mr. Kelly,
Here.
Mr. Lindmark,
Present.
Mr. McCarthy,
Present.
Mr. McDonald,
Here.
Mr. Neighbors,
Present.
Mrs. Red,
Present.
Mr. Salgado,
Present.
Mr. Schultz,
Here.
Mr. Tassoni,
Present.
Mr. Webster,
Here.
Mr. Westcott, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena,
Here.
Mr. Billich,
Here, and Mr. Westcott will be here shortly.
Mr. Booker,
Present.
Mr. Butita.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is currently 19 present and 1 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gummau. We do have a quorum this evening. We'll move on to item number 5 in our agenda under awards, presentations, public hearings, and public participation. I don't believe we have any awards this evening. I'm going to skip to number C, the public hearings. I don't believe we have any public hearings this evening. And number D, the public participation. Mr. Thompson, do we have anybody from the public to speak to us this evening?
No, no one has signed up to speak, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. So we'll go back to item number B for presentations. We have a special recognition of Steve Chapman this evening. I'd like to call on Mr. Webster, please.
Thank you. I just want to mention there, I've probably been around long enough to know Steve more than most of you, with the possible exception of Dorothy. So, Steve, I just want to thank you. You came back and bailed us out at a time when we were really in a jam. And without hesitation, we didn't know what to do without an administrator there before we could hire a new administrator, Mr. Thompson. And so we were in a real quandary, scratching our heads. What are we going to do? Dilemma. I called Steve, hadn't spoke to him for quite some time, a year or two. And I told him our dilemma. He said, yeah, I see that. And I said, do you think you'd be interested in coming back and helping us out? And without hesitation, he said, yes, I will do that. So after all those years of working for us and going through everything that he had all those years, he still came back and served us once more. And hats off to you, Steve. Salute. I appreciate everything you've done for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Would anyone else like to speak?
Here, here.
Who said here, here? Mr. Tassoni, I believe.
Mr. Schultz, here, here.
Mr. Schultz, if he'd like to speak first, I'd be happy with that.
Mr. Schultz.
No, I was just saying that I'm in agreement with what Mr. Webster said. Mr. Chapman has been a tremendous help to us over a very long period of time, very gifted. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Tassoni?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to, say to the board and to Steve personally, back when a few years ago, I was a New and Green board member. You've always brought the information and put it in layman's terms so that I could understand it. And what I always appreciated was he always succeeded in bringing a little humor to a very heavy subject. And I'd just like to say thank you, Steve, for coming back and helping us through these tough times and getting us down on a productive path. Thank you, and wish you the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Angie.
Yes. Ms. Goro, please.
Steve, I have to give you accolades too, because the fact when I came on almost 15 years ago, that you took me by the hand too, and I learned a whole lot from you. And by learning what you should be, it was really good, because when we had to get a new administrator, we knew the type of person we were looking for. It almost had to be a clone to you. So I want to thank you too for all the work you've done for us and how many times you've gotten us through the dark ages. And believe me, they were dark ages. But thank you, Steve. Hope to see you around. Don't forget us.
Chairman, this is Joe. I'd like to say something.
Thank you. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. Steve, I'm going to argue with Mr. Webster. I think I've known you longer than him, but when I knew you, you were kind of keeping money from me. But I got to say, when I got to know you on the other side, I agree with Mr. Webster completely. We wouldn't have made it without you. You entered when the waters were pretty rough, and by the time you had about a week underneath, the water smoothed out and everything seemed back to normal. So thank you for everything you did. You've been a great friend, and I hope we can get together and make a few trips, where later. So thanks for everything, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Angie Gorel, I don't know if there's anyone that can be a clone to Steve, but I asked the HR director to go through Steve's personnel file today, and I don't know how many of you were on the board in 1978, but that's when Steve began his long journey with Winnebago County back in 1978. He started off in the accounting division. He rose to the top of the finance department in accounting. In 1981, he was appointed by the board as the acting county controller. In 1985, he was appointed acting county administrator, and then I think shortly after that was appointed the permanent county administrator back in 1985. In 2017, Steve actually retired for the first time, and I think he was thoroughly enjoying it. But as Mr. Webster said, then he got a call, I think it was in August of 2019, with the request from Mr. Webster and a unanimous consensus by the board to bring Steve back on an interim basis after the administration and board office had gone through some some pretty tough times. So Steve came back out of retirement as the interim county administrator in August of 2019 and served in that capacity until I was hired in August of 2020. And Steve, he has been instrumental in helping with a very smooth transition from one county administrator then over to me as the new county administrator. And, you know, Steve was instrumental in assisting us get through that last budget process, which was very tough. And so then now Steve is gonna still help us out a little bit. He's got a few more hours left on his contract, and we're preserving those hours preciously to be able to consult with him as we work through some tough issues. What's great about Steve is because he's been with us for over 40 years, he has institutional knowledge, and it's irreplaceable. You can't replace that. And for a guy his age and a guy my age, he's got a very good memory. He knows so much about the history and, you know, what led to certain decisions. And so it's fun to pick his brain. And I think it was Mr. Hoffman or Mr. Webster, someone said that he's got a very a great sense of humor, subtle, but very effective in his communication style and his sense of humor. So, I mean, I don't think anyone is going to fill his shoes, certainly not me. But I can't say enough. I wasn't sure how it was going to work, how that would work with a transition like that. I've never had that. I've never been afforded to have the former administrator still working in the office when I started. But if there was any reluctance, it's long gone, because Steve has been nothing but helpful and has really gotten me off to what I hope in the board's eyes is a pretty good start. But on behalf of the board, Steve, and I'll present this to you, whenever you're in the office, but this is a gift from the county board to you, Steve. It's a very nice memento, and you probably can't read it, but it says Winnebago County, Illinois, to Steve Chapman, in appreciation for your many years of service to Winnebago County. So this will be sitting on your desk the next time you come in, Steve. And I think when the restaurants get open and things open up a bit more, those board members, myself and staff that would want to have a dinner somewhere locally with Steve and his wife, I'll arrange for that once things open up a bit more. So Steve, hats off to you. My door is always open to you, and I hope that you come back and visit a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would it be appropriate for us to give Steve a standing ovation, Zoom style?
Could I say something, please?
Yes, Mrs. Red, please.
Yes. I just want to say thank you, Steve. You've been with us a long time. In fact, when I came on the board in 2002, you were there. And I'm so happy that you were able to come back and help us. And I echo what everyone has said. And thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Red. So let's everyone give a hand of applause, and then we'll get to Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for all the kind words. And I know when Mr. Webster gave me a call, I was actually down in Biloxi doing the things that Joe Hoffman likes to do. But anyhow, when Jim called me, he said, "Are you available for 3 or 4 months?" And I said I'd talk to my wife, and she said, "Okay." So here we are, 18 months later. So, but it's been fun. I appreciate working with all of you. I think you got a great a great new team with the new chairman, Patrick and Dave. I think they'll do good things for you, and listen to them. I think they got some good ideas in that. So again, thank you, and I'm sure I'll see you around. So thanks again.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank
We
you.
all are, you're beloved in this community and for this organization. We appreciate your service. And we hope your blessings continue in your second retirement.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. All righty. We will move on now to the approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of December 22nd, 2020 and a layover of the January 14, 2021 minutes? I have a motion by Mr. Girl and a second by Mr. Lindmark. Is there any discussion on the approval of the minutes? Hearing none. Clerk Gumbau, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Thank you all. You did a great job. Mr. Chairman, that's 20 yes.
Thank you. So it was 20 yes on those minutes that December 22nd, 2020 has been approved and January 14th, 2021 has been laid over. Thank you. Item number 7 is the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the raffle report and the auditor's report, please? I got Mr. Salgado's motion to approve and Mr. Arena is the second. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing or seeing none. Clerk Gumbau, can you call the roll, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
One last time for Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, that's 20 yes.
Thank you, Clerk Gumbau. The raffle report and the auditor's report have been approved by 20-0. Thank you. We'll move to the administrator's report. Mr. Thompson, is there a report this evening?
No, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other administrative reports this evening?
No, Mr. Chairman.
None? Thank you so much, Mr. Thompson. We will move on to number 8 is the appointments. Per county board rules, appointments require a 30-day layover unless there is a suspension of the rules. Tonight, I am placing up the Greater Rockford Airport Authority to Mr. Tom Del Santo. I believe we have a hand came up from Ms. Fellers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion that we suspend the rules. Am I on mute? Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we suspend the rules and approve the appointment of Tom Del Santo to the Rockford Airport Authority this evening.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the rules by Ms. Fellers and a second by Mr. Huffman. And others, Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Billich, Mr. Westcott. Thank you. Is there any discussion on the suspension of rules? Hearing none. Clerk Gamal, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Thank you all, Mr. Chairman. That's 20 yes.
Thank you. So the rules have been suspended. Could I get a motion to place Tom Del Santo on the Greater Rockford Airport Authority, please? Ms. Fellers is the motion, and Mr. Billich and Mr. Huffman and Mr. McCarthy are all seconds, and as well as many others. Thank you. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing or seeing none. Clerk Gamal, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
and Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
Thank you all, Mr. Chairman. That's 20 yes.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. So Mr. Tom Del Santo has now been reappointed to the Greater Rockford Airport Authority by 20 votes of the county board. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to item number 9 is the reports of standing committees. And our first committee this evening is the Finance Committee. Mr. Salgado, please.
We have no report today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. We'll move on to Zoning Committee. Mr. Webster.
Thanks. We have no report either.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. The Economic and Development Committee, Mr. Billich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report tonight as well.
Thank you, Mr. Billich. We'll move to the Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. Keith McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. We move to Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have one item on the agenda tonight. It's a resolution 21-001. It's a resolution supporting the construction of a multi-use bicycle and pedestrian path on East Riverside Boulevard, east of Perryville. And I would so move.
We have a motion and a second. Very good. Mr. Tassoni and Mr. Kelly, I believe, was the second. Is there any discussion? Yes, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This encompasses or surrounds County Board District 7, 8, and 20, which is Mr. Arena, Mr. Butita, and Mr. Billich. And if either of those would like to speak to it and what the item is about, I'd be happy to entertain that.
Very good. Mr. Butita.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is a proposal to put a crosswalk across Riverside Bridge at I-90 and then hooking it to the Perryville path. Involves my district and Paul Arenas and Jazz Village. And I think one of the assets of our area has been our recreational path on the river, the Perryville path, and other paths throughout the county. So this will kind of coordinate and provide some safety getting from one side of the interstate to the other. So I hope, and I encourage all the members to endorse this, which is kind of a kickoff. It's not a commitment to do it, but it's at least kicking the ball down the road to find out how much it will cost and see if we can find the money for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butita. And Mr. Billich?
Yes, and I'd like to just second what Mr. Butita said. He said it very well, and he included many points to that, which were absolutely right.
Thank you, Mr. Billich. Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I agree when Mr. Butita brought this idea to my attention. I thought it was a great idea. This is a developing area of the county. We're seeing a lot of economic activity there, investments by business with the Mercy Health campus there and the sports core facilities. I think this will tie in the whole area well. And as was stated, this is just a initiative to investigate the cost associated with it and identify funding sources. So I would appreciate the support of our colleagues here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Is there any further discussion? So before the board, we have a motion to approve the resolution supporting a multi-use bicycle and pedestrian path on East Riverside Boulevard, east of Perryville Road. So Clerk Gumbau, could you please call the roll?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. We will start with Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark.
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors.
Yes.
Mrs. Red. Mrs. Red. Come back. Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
Yes.
Mr. Billich.
Yes.
Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Ms. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
One more time for Mrs. Red. Mr. Chairman, according to our most recent parliamentary training, I believe we have 19 yes, 1 absent, and not voting.
Very good. Thank you, Clerk Gumbau. We got 19 yes, 1 absent. Thank you. The motion has been approved. The resolution has been approved supporting a multi-use bicycle.
I'm sorry. I'm a yes.
All right. Would you like to record that as a yes, Ms. Gumbau?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Red. I will modify the roll call to reflect that is 20 yes.
Very good. The resolution has been approved by 20 votes. Thank you. We'll move on to the Public Safety and Judiciary Committee. Mr. Burrow, please.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, please, if I still have the floor here. There was a little bit of a discussion in our last joint caucus meeting, and I would like to take the opportunity to ask Mr. Carlos Molina, our highway engineer, to just give us a very brief, a brief description of how bike paths are forth, how they're installed, and how they're maintained, whether it be through the county highway department or various other jurisdictions. If we could just give them the floor for a few minutes.
Absolutely, Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Molina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Yeah, the bike paths that the county maintains are pretty much the Perryville path, the Pecatonica Prairie path, and the Charles Street path. Both the Perryville and Pecatonica path were constructed with using ITEP funds, which is basically federal funds where the feds pay for 80% and the locals pay for 20%. As far as maintenance goes, we cannot use motor fuel tax, MFT funds to maintain or build paths. So pretty much as far as maintenance go, we have to use county highway funds. The Perryville path was constructed in the late 90s and into the 2000s. And, about 2 years ago, we put a 2-inch overlay from Guilford Road to Springbrook. We actually have in this year's budget another mile of resurfacing from Riverside going north. As far as maintenance goes, besides mowing and plowing snow, that's about all we do. The Pecatonica Parade Path, there is a commission that is comprised by 5 agencies: Winnebago County, Stevenson County, the Rockford Park District, and the city of Freeport. And we got together back in the late 90s to construct the portion within Winnebago County. And for the most part, that path is gravel or limestone. And then the Stevenson County, they have been in the process of building a portion of their path. They just got done with about 2 miles last year. Maintenance for that goes, there's some entities like the Village of Winnebago, the Village of Pecatonica, the Sumner Park District. They contribute, for the maintenance, mowing and things like that. But again, when it comes to major expenses for maintenance of these paths, we have to use county highway funds.
And if I could, Mr. Molina, if whatever time frame it would be, if a pedestrian path was erected over the I-39/90 interchange there from Perryville over to the east there, if that was constructed, is that something that you feel confident that you could maintain without much, inconvenience to your operation?
Yes, we could do that. As far as plowing goes, we would plow that. I failed to mention that we also have another path at the Bauer Bridge. There is a pedestrian path that we built back in 1993, and we maintain that as well. I'm confident that we could, whether we can build it, by extending the existing bridge, that I do not know yet. We'll have to talk to structural engineers and the tollway, because the Riverside Bridge over I-90, that's actually a tollway bridge. So we will have to coordinate with them.
I thank you very much for that. No, and it'd be my intentions that we get the state to build it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Carl. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Sassoni, for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to item number F, is the Public Safety and Judiciary Committee. Mr. Gurl, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Public Safety and Judiciary Committee, has 2 resolutions this evening. The first item E is a resolution authorizing the county board chairman to amend contracts for health care services for inmates of the Winnebago County Jail and detainees of the Juvenile Detention Center. And I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. Gurl. Do we have a second by Mr. Booker? Thank you. So is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, if we can have Mr. Thompson or Captain Owen speak to this, or both of them, I would appreciate it.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you.
Who would like to go first? Mr. Thompson?
Yes, I'll just briefly, this is a 5-year contract, which was originally bid out. The University of Illinois College of Medicine provides the medical services for both the adult and juvenile detention facilities. This is a contract renewal, 1 year. The dollar amount is $2.8 million. It does represent a 9.7% increase over the existing contract. So the staff is working to analyze both the contract renewal and other options going forward. But at this point, it's the staff's recommendation and the recommendation of the sheriff's office that we renew the contract with the University of Illinois College of Medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Is Captain Owens available?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Captain Owens, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. We've been working on trying to get this contract resolved as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, what was presented to us is that the University School of Medicine was not willing or able financially to continue the service unless they had this increase of the 9.7%. And so we have an obligation to provide medical services to anybody that's incarcerated in our facility. We are intending on diligently looking for other options, but at this point in time, this is the best option that we have going forward. And we know what we have currently, and if we can find another service down the road that would meet the requirements, we would just entertain that idea and present that to the board. But at this point in time, this is the only option we have.
Okay, thank you, Captain Owens. Is there any further questions? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question for Captain Owens. The federal inmates, do we pay for their medical, or does the feds take care of that?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
This is Bob Redden.
Yes,
No,
Mr. Redden.
absolutely no federal inmate money goes to medical. They pay everything for us. And I would only say, and I'll defer to Charlotte, that this is part of the contract of the university, that they have the option for an opener, if I could say that. I'm not sure, Charlotte, on the legal terms, that they are able to open this up under the contract we're currently under. But as far as federal inmates, everything that we do with federal inmates, if we drive them to the hospital, we're paid by the federal government. If they go to the hospital and have whatever the amount may be, that's paid by the federal government.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Redmond. Are there any other questions? Okay. So we have a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the county board chairman to amend the contracts for healthcare services for inmates of the Winnebago County Jail and detainees of the Juvenile Detention Center. Clerk Gumbau, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We will start with Mr. Lindmark,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Thank you all, Mr. Chairman. That's 20 yes.
Thank you. The resolution is approved by 20 votes. Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next resolution is item F, and it's a resolution renewing the annual maintenance agreement for X-ray scanners. And I so move.
Very good. We have a motion to approve by Mr. Girl. Do we have a second? Mr. Lindmark is the second. Mr. McCarthy. Is there any discussion?
Real quick, if I could, Mr. Chairman, this is an annual agreement. We do this every year. There was no increase into this year's contract. We pay just under $31,000 to maintain the X-ray scanners. If Mr. Thompson has anything to add, I'll defer to him.
No, you covered it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Is there any further discussion? So we have a motion to approve the resolution renewing the annual maintenance agreement for X-ray scanners. Clerk Gamow, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. We will start with Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Lindmark.
Yes.
Thank you all. Mr. Chairman, that's 20 yes.
Thank you, Clerk Gamow. We have 20 yes and 0 opposed. Thank you, Mr. Girl.
Thank you.
We'll move on to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business before this board? Hearing or seeing none, we'll move on to item number 11. Is there any new business for this body? Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like your administration, possibly state's attorney, to work with our purchasing department and any new contracts that we do. If we could have language in there that states that the vendor has to notify us within a certain amount of days to any increase in any kind of contract or any cost to the county, that'd be very helpful to us.
Thank you, Mr. Girl. Well noted. Mr.
Thank you.
Thompson will be working on that. Thank you. Is there any new business? Okay, we'll move on to item number 12 is announcements and communications. Clerk Gamow, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
Very good. Is there any announcements or communications for board members? I see Mr. Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I just wanted to thank Charlotte Leclerc, who will be leaving Winnebago County employment week from tomorrow. And in my short time here, Charlotte has been very, very helpful. And I've heard from many department heads who are sad to see her leave. And it just speaks volumes for the amount of work that she did for each and every one of our departments. And we talked about big shoes to fill from Steve. Charlotte, although small in frame, she's going to leave big empty shoes too. So on behalf of county administration, I think I speak for all our department heads and staff, Charlotte, that we're going to miss you. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Good luck to Charlotte, and we appreciate your service to our county here. Thank you. Is there any further communications? So
Yes, I'd like to say something.
Yes, Ms. Gorel, please.
Thank you. Charlotte has been our attorney on many of the committees that I have been on. And I'll tell you, without her guidance, we would have been in big, deep doo-doo a couple of times. I truly appreciate Charlotte. I appreciate all you have done for all our committees. And having served under you, it has been such a nice privilege. I agree with the others who have said, whoever takes your place, even though you have a small frame, honey, you got big feet, you got big shoes to fill. So I wish you all the luck in your upcoming adventure, and that you don't forget us back here once in a while. But good luck in your future and what you're going to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gorel. So recently, this past week, the county announced there was an $8.3 million grant that was awarded to the county for landlords and tenants for rental assistance. And I want to thank our county administration. I want to thank our housing authority with Alan Zeiss. I want to thank Mr. Arena for all his work on this. We are working very diligently to get this program stabilized and up and running and get some monies to the much needed folks that need it. So I just want to let the county board know we're working very hard on that. I'm very proud that we received that grant, so it can do some good stuff for the landlords and the tenants. So is there any further communications for the county board? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn? We got Mr. Hoffman and Mr. McCarthy. Any discussion on the adjournment? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you. We are adjourned. Have a good evening.